Earlier today, standing alongside his Norwegian counterpart, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a statement that effectively dismantled 50 years of global energy orthodoxy. Following a unanimous decision by the 32 member nations of the International Energy Agency, IEA, to inject 400 million barrels of crude into a starving market, Carney asserted that Canada, the world's third largest holder of proven oil reserves, simply does not need a strategic stockpile. Exporters like Norway and Canada aren't required to maintain reserves because we are the source. We are the ones providing the flow, Carney explained with a clinical, almost detached confidence. Stockpiles are for the importers, those who need a 90-day buffer to survive a shock. Our role isn't to store, our role is to supply. The timing of this no-reserve doctrine is nothing short of incendiary. The global economy is currently navigating the most violent energy dislocation in modern history. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iranian forces has effectively vaporized 9 million barrels of daily supply. In a world gasping for liquidity, Carney just told the planet that Canada isn't keeping a rainy day fund because Canada is the rain. To understand the weight of Carney's words, one must look at the sheer scale of the 2026 crisis. The IEA's coordinated release of 400 million barrels is the largest emergency intervention in the agency's half-century existence. Yet, while the rest of the developed world is frantically drawing down their insurance barrels, Canada is taking a radically different path. Instead of tapping a reserve, Canada has committed to a production surge of 23.6 million barrels to meet its IEA obligations. This creates a fascinating, if terrifying, contradiction. One of the world's top 5 oil producers is signaling that it prefers active production over passive storage during the worst energy shock since the 1990 Gulf War. For energy analysts and competing OPEC+ nations, this is a signal fire. When a primary exporter sends mixed messages during a global maritime blockade, the markets don't just fluctuate, they convulse. Carney's assertion at the Holman-Cohen Sky Festival was clear. Canada is a safe, low-risk, and low-carbon alternative to the volatile Middle East. But in a world where 1/5 of global oil normally passes through a now-closed 21-mile-wide strait, low risk is a relative term that the market is struggling to price. The numbers behind this conflict are sobering. Since the kinetic conflict in the Middle East began on February 28, 2026, Brent crude has performed a violent dance of volatility. It rocketed by 80%, testing the $120 per barrel ceiling before retreating to $90, only to surge back toward $110 as Carney spoke. Consulting giants like Wood Mackenzie and the Rapidan Energy Group have labeled this the single largest supply disruption in human history. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz doesn't just block oil, it blocks the global economy's circulatory system. In this context, Carney's exporter's logic is being tested in real time. By aligning with Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, Carney is attempting to build a northern axis of reliability. The message to the West is, we are the stable, democratic tap that won't be turned off by a regional war. However, the market is asking, can a production increase in the Alberta oil sands actually replace the 9 million barrels lost in the Persian Gulf? The Carney strategy is built on a foundation of aggressive economic sovereignty. Earlier this year at the World Economic Forum in Davos, he branded Canada an energy superpower, promising a hard-nosed, elbows-up approach to defending Canadian resources against U.S. trade volatility. But this superpower status comes with a heavy domestic price tag. In late 2025, Carney authorized a controversial new oil pipeline to the West Coast, a move that triggered the immediate resignation of his environment minister and sparked a unified front of opposition from the Assembly of First Nations. This is the central paradox of the Carney administration. The global pitch. Canada is the green oil exporter, using projects like the $14 billion Bay du Nord off the coast of Newfoundland to prove it can produce low-carbon crude. The project reality. Bay du Nord won't see its first drop of oil until at least 2031. It is a long-term solution for an immediate 2026-style crisis. The policy friction. Environmental advocates are pointing to the hypocrisy of subsidizing massive offshore projects while promising to move away from fossil fuel dependence. When asked about the employment paradox, the loss of 84,000 jobs in February, Carney pivoted to the macro view, citing a net gain of 84,000 jobs over the last year and pointing to massive infrastructure projects like the Mackenzie Valley Highway and new Arctic military bases as the true engines of Canadian growth. The market's volatility is fueled by a terrifying realization. The IEA's 400 million barrel shield is surprisingly thin. The U.S. commitment to release 172 million barrels from its Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR, over 4 months translates to roughly 1.4 million barrels per day. According to analysts at Bernstein, that covers only 15% of the supply lost to the Hormuz blockade. Furthermore, it takes nearly 2 weeks from the moment the president signs an authorization for those barrels to even reach a refinery. J.P. Morgan Chase has issued a sobering warning. No amount of reserve releases can stabilize prices as long as the Strait of Hormuz remains a combat zone. The market is already proving them right. Despite the record release, Dubai crude, the Asian benchmark, hit a historic high of $150 per barrel. In the U.S., the average cost at the pump has surged by 50 cents in a single week, hitting a national average of $3.57 per gallon. The IEA Executive Director, Fatih Birol, has painted a bleak picture. Refinery operations are seizing up, global LNG supplies have been slashed by 20%, and the diesel crunch is threatening to halt global trucking and shipping. To understand why the 400 million barrel narrative is a mirage, you have to look at the daily burn rate of the planet. Global oil demand currently sits at 105.17 million barrels per day. The math is brutal. Total IEA release, 400 million barrels. Global survival time, roughly 4 days of total consumption. Hormuz traffic equivalent. The entire release equals only about 20 days of the normal flow through the strait. While global observed stocks total 8.2 billion barrels, the highest since 2021, half of that is commercial inventory. The emergency government-held portion is only 1.25 billion barrels. When the world is losing 9 million barrels every 24 hours, those reserves don't look like a fortress. They look like a countdown clock. This is where Carney's no-reserve stance becomes a $400 billion market narrative. By declaring that Canada doesn't need to hold a stockpile, he is betting the entire Canadian economy on the reliability of flow. If the conflict in Iran extends into the summer of 2026, or if a secondary blockade emerges in the Red Sea, Canada's lack of a strategic buffer could be interpreted as a catastrophic vulnerability rather than a sign of strength. Energy markets don't just price in what exists, they price in risk. And right now, Canada's messaging is generating maximum uncertainty. Is Canada a climate leader moving toward a post-carbon future? Or is it a ruthless energy merchant positioning itself to dominate a starving market? The Carney administration is attempting to be both simultaneously. They are building green highways while approving $14 billion offshore oil rigs. They are talking about low-carbon oil while the world is desperate for any carbon at all. Rystad Energy's forecasts are grim. A 2-month war in the Persian Gulf keeps Brent at $110. A 4-month war spikes it to $135 by June. If the conflict enters its second quarter, the IEA member states will have exhausted nearly a third of their total reserves. The U.S. will have burned through 41% of its SPR. When those buckets run dry and the strait remains closed, the global economy will have only one place to look: the providers. This is when Mark Carney's statement will be put to the ultimate test. The world is watching to see if Canada can actually perform the impossible balancing act, maintaining its status as a green energy superpower, while pumping the record-breaking volumes of oil that the world needs to survive. In the 2026 energy market, confusion is the only constant. And as every trader knows, confusion equals volatility, and volatility is the engine of the global price surge.